Hopefully you guys have watched my flight videos, my latest flight videos of this StaggerWing, and it has good power on 2S with the prop that I use. It performs aerobatics with authority. And the biggest thorn in my side with this plane when it was stock was the lack of roll that it had. And if you've watched the latest videos, you know that it has an excellent roll rate now. I think I can do just about anything with it that I want to with authority. So if you guys are interested in getting yours flying the way mine is flying and handling the way mine is flying, we'll look at the details of this. All right, so first up is the prop, and I use an APC Style 7x5 two-blade composite prop. Now the shaft on this motor, you know, the back side of it is 6mm diameter, and the front side, the threaded portion is 5mm. So you're going to need one of these props that I'll have links to that come with a set of spacers. Now I used a different couple of spacers. I just used whatever I had on hand that would work. But I've got a spacer that has a 6mm diameter inside hole on the back side of the prop, and a spacer that has a 5mm diameter hole in the front of the prop, and then just tightened it down, and that worked just absolutely great. You know, that's the only thing I had to do. 6mm spacer behind it, 5mm spacer in front of it. If you buy these props that I have the links for that come with these spacers, you'll have a 6mm and a 5mm spacer with the prop when you buy it. Okay, don't forget that. You're going to need those spacers to mount it on here. All right, now, roll authority. The little tiny 2-gram servos that this plane comes with installed with the little tiny short servo arms that only have 2 holes. There's just no way you're going to get the amount of aileron deflection you're going to need to have good roll authority with this plane with those stock servos. I've got HXT 500, they're 5-gram analog servos, Hextronic. I had them on hand. I think that 4-gram servos would work just fine. You can save a couple of grams of weight with 4-gram servos. They would work just fine. I think 4-gram servos would have enough torque to move these control surfaces the amount of movement that you need. You need to make sure, though, that whatever servos you purchase for this project, for these ailerons, is that they have fairly long arms. They're going to need fairly long servo arms to get your linkage set up to where you have enough control surface movement on. The other thing I had to do, because you got to cut out a little bit of foam to get these larger, wider servos installed. So I positioned these, I cut out foam and positioned them so I could use the existing wire channels that they already had, you know, built into the wing. So that's what I used. I had to cut out some foam around where the control arms were, because when you get full movement of the servo arm, you want to make sure it's not pressing against the foam, right? That's you don't want anything obstructing that. So I had to cut out some foam around that. The other thing I had to do was I put in some thicker control horns for the ailerons. And I had to move those out since the servo is wider than the stock ones. In order to get a straight line between the servo arm and the control horn, you need to move the control horn out a bit. And I would recommend doing that anyway, because I think the stock ones are just too thin and too flexible to begin with. The other thing that allowed me to get more movement on the control surface on the ailerons was that the stock control horns, where the linkage connected, where this clevis connected to the stock control horns, was not over top of this pivot point here. So you end up having asymmetric movement of the control surface when that pivot point is not over top of the hinge area. You'll either get more movement up or you'll get more movement down, but they won't be symmetrical. By positioning the link where it pivots on the control horns, the modified control horns, putting it over top of this hinge area gives me a symmetric movement up and down on the ailerons, which also makes if you watch the rolls, they're very tight and they're very symmetrical. And that's because you get the same amount of movement up and down on these ailerons, as opposed to those stock control horns. So I would recommend doing that. All right, and here's a close-up of the linkage, the servo, the replacement servo. Worked out really well. It did add some weight to the airframe, but that also it handled it very well. I can bring it in fairly slowly and set it down, as you guys have seen if you watch the flight videos after I got it all tuned out. Here is my layout of all my components. Now my components, I used a Hobby King 10 amp ESC. It has a UBAC on it, and I think the UBAC is 5 volt 1 amp. If you're just going to fly it on a 2S, 10 amp ESC is plenty. With that prop that I've got on there on 2S with the stock motor, it's only going to be pulling between 6 to 7 amps at full throttle. So a 10 amp ESC is absolutely fine if you're just going to fly it on 2S, and it has good power on 2S. I can perform aerobatics with authority with the 2S setup that I have currently. If you want to fly it on 2S or 3S like I want to do, then I would suggest you put in a 12 amp ESC. As I measured the amp draw with a Gemfan flash 6042 prop, which is what I use for a 3S setup, and it's pulling 9.8 amps at full throttle on 3S. So I would suggest replacing the 10 amp ESC that I have in here now with a 12 amp ESC, which is what I'm going to do. As soon as my new ESCs show up, I'm going to be putting a 10 amp ESC in here and putting that Gemfan flash 6042 two blade prop on it so I can test it on 3S. I think it's going to be outstanding. You guys know, if you followed any of my mods, I really love these RadioLink Byme gyros. So I've got a Byme-A gyro in mine. You can see that I've got standard servo connectors on it now. I've got this Y connector on here for connecting the two independent servos for the ailerons. All right, and then I removed the stock board and just glued in my servos to the sides of the fuselage. That worked great. And then I removed the board and installed the receiver that I wanted, which was a WFly RF 201S SBUS PPM receiver. That's been my go-to receiver for the past 2 or 3 years, and I've never had a problem with one of them. All right, so here's a close-up of the ESC I have installed, the Byme gyro, and here's a close-up. These are Emax 2.5 gram digital servos. They seem to have plenty of torque for moving the rudder and the elevator. No problems with that. You can use smaller servos for the elevator and the rudder, but for the ailerons, I recommend the larger servos. And then I've just velcroed. I put Velcro on the receiver and Velcro on the fuselage there to secure the receiver, and then I punched a couple of holes in the side of the fuselage to bring the antennas through. And to go back to the ESC and the gyro here, the gyro is actually mounted upside down. Okay, so one of the things that you need to do if you're going to mount one of these Byme gyros upside down, you can do that. You can mount them right side up or upside down. You need to recalibrate the gyro so that the gyro knows that its default position is upside down. And then I think I had to change the phase on at least 2 of the channels. I can't remember if it was the elevator and the rudder, if it was the ailerons, but I know 2 of the 3 channels I had to change the phase on, because once I had it positioned upside down, it was correcting in the wrong direction. So if you mount it upside down like I did, you're going to need to recalibrate the gyro so that it knows it's inverted and works properly inverted, and then you're probably going to have to change the phase, with the little black button here. You're probably going to have to change the phase on at least a couple of channels to get it correcting everything in the proper direction. All right, I also carved out some foam. I can't remember exactly what I carved out, but if you look at what yours looks like and what mine looks like, you'll see exactly the foam that I carved out of it. I think it was just this center separator here, but I can't be positive about that. It's been a while. since I did it, and then I laid down a bunch of Velcro, and so I've got my ESC and my gyro all Velcroed in and secured. Everything is working just great. All right, so we'll go back to where we were. And we're back to the beginning now. So stay tuned. As soon as I get my new 12 amp ESC installed in this plane, I'll be testing out on 3S as well. I have been wanting an aerobatic biplane for a long time. I'm glad I pulled the trigger on this. You saw how much room was in there, right? In that battery bay for all the electronics and everything. So performing this mod, I had plenty of room to install everything. Because the wing comes completely off of it, it made it pretty easy, really, as far as modifications go. And there's just no comparison between the way that this plane handles now and the way it was stock. I didn't care for it stock at all. You know, if you're going to do anything more than just cruise around with it in fully stabilized mode as it is stock, there was no way I was going to be happy with this plane until I performed all these mods. Now I'm just absolutely ecstatic with the way this plane is flying and handling and perform aerobatics. So now it's just going to be a lot of fun going forward. I will try to get together once I get some test flights on it using the 3S LIPO. See if I have to make any adjustments on the control surface setup. I'll go ahead and publish my setup file. Hopefully I'll have a setup that works well for 2S and 3S. If not, then I'll have a separate setup file for a 2S setup and one for a 3S setup. So stay tuned for that. I'll publish those as soon as I get everything golden. All right. That's a wrap on this episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time in the Tinkerz Lab.